Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the Netflix series Boots. And I'm joined today by cast members Miles Heizer, Max Parker, and Liam O, along with creator and co-showrunner and executive producer Andy Parker, and co-showrunner and executive producer Jennifer Cecil. And Andy, in starting with you and the way that you've kind of crafted this show, I think it's really beautiful to see all the different reasons that all of the recruits have for signing up, and just, the way that you've built out their backstory and their history. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about, shaping not just the main cast, but even the periphery characters having such depth to those backgrounds.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It was really important right from the start that this be an ensemble show. And of course, our way into the show is through this gay character who has incredible stakes in joining the Marines at this time in history. But it was also really important that we would see all the people that he comes in contact with, and we get to know them. I think it's clear what Cameron, our main character, is hiding, but every single other part of our ensemble, they're coming in with something that they're either running away from, that they're trying to hide, that they're having to confront. And boot camp is the place that gets confronted for everybody.
And Jennifer, in coming to you and talking about the arc of this show, we see all of these recruits going through everything from day one, and it really feels like all of the drills and training that we see them go through and all the exercises are a really interesting way to show character development and story within them. And I was interested in, as you were shaping the arc of the season, how you wanted to use the different stages of training to really focus in on character.
Well, the stages of training do reflect what the Marines go through. It was a big motto for this show to be as accurate as we possibly could. So these guys did go through a little bit of boot camp. These guys did all get their heads shaved. They went through this as a unit, and I think what that shows you as the series progresses is they start to coalesce the way that a unit in boot camp would coalesce. They're having difficult days and people buck them up. They're having great days and people are supporting them. So we're using what boot camp gives us to show us who these characters are, both their own journeys and how they're reacting with the others.
Yeah. And Miles, in talking about Cameron, he has this entire inner world and inner voice, as well as the external way that he's presenting himself to the world. And we see that in a literal sense, because you get to play scenes across from yourself.
Yes.
But also it's something where even when that's not the case, you can kind of see the introspect throughout your performance in the series. And I was interested in how having those scenes where you got to play it kind of helped you to think about that constant inner dialogue the rest of the season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think as actors, the idea is to be having this inner dialogue going on to try to portray the way that a real person behaves. And yeah, it's such a rare experience to get to also play that in the flesh. A little horrifying. There are definitely moments where I'm like doing the scene to nothing. Like for the most part, I had a double. His name was Maddie, and we worked out this little routine where before we started filming, we would go through and run the scenes as both characters, so that he could sort of get a grasp of like my physicality. So that he could match it when it was over his shoulder. But then there's times where it's a split screen where they'd be like, all right, Maddie, like, you're good. And I would just have to like sit there and sort of do this scene with myself. But it's very cool to look back and like now I have footage of myself talking to my other self. But yeah, I do think that it sort of helped with developing the character to even just have like the words from the writers of like, this is actually what his inner dialogue is. It's like, it's very beneficial in the long run for the full arc of Cameron's story.
Yeah, I love that. And, Max, in playing Sullivan, when we first meet him on screen, he has such a hardened exterior and he kind of really leans into a lot of the hyper-masculinity within the Marines. But over time, we see a lot of the reasons for that. And we see kind of more of the gentle side, and not necessarily a softness, but kind of a gentleness and a protectiveness towards some of the other recruits. And I was interested in how you wanted to come in with that really tough exterior and then gradually find those moments throughout.
Yeah, I also love the way it's structured in a sense that, you first see the monster and you see this person, then you sort of get to know how he became that person with, the backstory. And also like as an actor to play a role like this was obviously huge in terms of like all the amazing things that you get to do and all the different sides of Sullivan that you get to explore. But also it's sort of a really important story, I guess, to a lot of gays, the sense of hiding who you are, and sort of the result of what that can end up like. Sullivan's sort of the perfect example of maybe what not to do, but acting Sullivan at the start, this closed book drill instructor, was incredible because I loved shouting. But yeah, when you see the side of him when he finally lets go with Wilkinson, with his lover that he never expected, and just to see the sadness of what he loses really, and his integrity eventually when he sort of sells himself out in order to run away from, people finding out that he was gay. And I think, sorry, I've literally been like, noticed my stomach's like rumbling the whole way through. And I'm like, okay, should I say what I just said again? No, it was sort of a job that was hard but made easier by the writing and by sort of the gift that was given to me to play it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And Liam in playing Ray, there's so much that he wants to live up to for his relationship with his dad and all his accomplishments. And at the beginning, it's all about becoming squad leader and getting that delineation as honor man. And by the end, it feels like the goalposts have completely changed and it becomes something much more personal and introspective for him.
Yeah.
And so I was interested in how that really shaped this beautiful arc and kind of allowed you to think differently about his motivations throughout.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that my way in to Ray was this kind of idea of perfectionism that I think a lot of, kids of immigrants, grandkids of immigrants can really relate to. I think there's this expectation of perfection in order that to not waste, everything that the previous generations have done to get you to this point. And I think Ray has that on one side of his family. His mom is a Korean immigrant, and then on the other end you have the military perfectionism, and together those two combine to create one messed up kid. But I think like ultimately Ray's journey over the course of the season is I think an exercise in letting go, and the idea that it's sounds simple, but the hardest lesson to learn, that it's impossible to be perfect at any given time. And that in fact, there's a greater strength that you find in acknowledging that and acknowledging your flaws instead of running away from them.
Yeah. And for both of you in kind of show running the series, I wanted to talk about the way that you came up with a lot of the different backstories and family lives, because it's not something where we're seeing all of them at home with their parents and their families or their wives and their children before they go off, but we get such a window into that world of all of them through the letters that they write home or the things that they choose to tell each other that feel important to them. And so I was just curious about how you both said about shaping all of that.
Well, I think it's a real credit to Andy's writing that you see these characters on the page instantly. And once you have that, then the actors bring their particular spin to it as well. But you can't have a good basis to build a character from if you don't see it on the page, which Andy did in spades.
And I think it was important. Thank you, by the way.
I'll expect the 50.
Yeah. I think it was important to make sure that we saw that the military is not a monolith. Everybody's coming to this from a different place, from a different motivation, and being able to speak to that, to reveal the different ways people come to this and what they're hoping to get out of it. That was important to show that diversity.
Yeah. And for the three of you, obviously there's a huge physical component to these roles, and you will come at it in such a different way according to your characters. Cameron's not coming in with a natural skill set and ability at first, so he struggles a little bit more. He's holding a rifle and he's not quite certain how to do it. Sullivan is so adept because he's so experienced and has received so many commendations, and Ray is really striving for perfection. And so as you were going through the physical training, how were you constantly thinking about a way to use that side of things to kind of speak about your characters on screen?
I mean, I was nervous at the challenge, not being from a military background, not being American, and also never meeting anyone when I'm doing my auditions. I sort of did everything on Zoom. Then by the time it came to me being on set, there was the writer's strikes. And so until we came back after those strikes, no one had actually seen me in real life. So I was like, I hope I'm gonna do a good job. So yeah, I had a lot of nervous energy, which sort of made me
focus more and research more and sort of really want to do a testament to the writing and also like the real Marines. And it was almost like the helping hand with the advisors that we had on set. We could always rely and lean on them. Like, is this the right thing? Would we stand like this? Just to help us, because, you've got so much going on, you might not necessarily film things in order. So to have that support was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in a way we kind of have this luxury, the recruits at least, where boot camp, the entire point is like everyone's going into it blindly. Yeah. No one knows what to expect. And I think that, especially for Cameron, he's possibly the most blind entering boot camp. So yeah, I sort of went into it like not preparing for any of the physical stuff. But I think naturally over shooting, we just all, I mean, there is so much repetition in the military, and that's a huge, point of, that's a huge point of boot camp, is this constant repetition to learn these things. And I feel like by the end of it, we had improved in all these things in ways that do kind of show on screen. But I think that I also had an awareness that I wanted Cameron to have a noticeable difference from the beginning to the end. And I was definitely aware of that and tried to be, just cognizant as we were going on of like slowly getting better and locking in more. And fortunately, we had military advisors there who were truly 24 hours. You could call them, text them if you ever had questions, and we're very good about trying to make sure that we looked as good as we could when we needed to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Miles, I had almost no experience in this type of training before. But unfortunately for me, my character was supposed to come in with more experience than almost anyone else. So I only had 3 days. I had only had 3 days in between getting cast in this and having to like start production. So I had literally zero prep time for this. So that was a bit scary at first. But what it ultimately came down to was this kind of a way of carrying yourself, and it, that and an outlook, in a physical outlook that Ray has coming from a military family, which is very different from my own, the way I carry myself and hold myself. So just that, and the hard skills we came as we were shooting the show. We would just kind of learn the skills as we needed, and as was needed by the show. But ultimately, it was this kind of more nebulous idea of how does someone hold themselves when they've been steeped in this tradition their whole life.
Yeah.
And what does nebulous mean?
I don't know. I'm just an actor. I just listen. Sometimes I see them on a script, and I'm like, that's a good word. I'm gonna say that sometime.
Andy, I feel like Miles was making such a great point about, the version of Cameron at the end is very different to the beginning. And, at the beginning, his mind's kind of wafting off and he's like, oh, sorry, I'm such a rose from the Golden Girls. Or he mistakes Honor Man for being Best Man as the title. And then he kind of really locks in a very different way. And so how did that create an evolution in writing that character and even just their dialogue or the pacing and the rhythm of them?
Well, it was very important to make sure that we saw, as Miles was talking about, a clear arc and journey for Cameron. I think one of the ways that that gets most dramatized on screen is through his interaction with Inner Cameron, his relationship with him. And that the change in their dynamic and in their perspectives is something that I think is really powerful and poignant over the season. But it was also important that we really believed that Cameron was participating and learning and growing, and that he was becoming a true Marine. So that by the time that we see him at graduation, we know that he's really earned this.
Yeah. Jennifer, I also wanted to ask about the storyline with Cameron's mom, played by Vera Farmiga. Because I think it's really lovely to see that she's someone who thinks of herself as very strong and not really needing people around her that much. And she kind of realizes when she's thrust into this Marine mom support group that actually she does need some semblance of connection and people that understand what she's going through as well. And I was interested in how you wanted that to be part of the story.
Yeah, Vera is an extraordinary actress. We were incredibly lucky to get her. And particularly for a show like this, which is an all-male cast, when you bring in a female character, she has to be able to stand up to that and hold her own. And Vera did that in spades. I mean, she was funny. She was awful. She was loving. She got to do, we didn't have a lot of screen time with her, but the screen time that she had, she did an entire range of a full woman's life in the same way that these guys were able to with all the episodes and all the screen time they got. And I think it's very important to see where Cameron came from and understand how much he had to overcome to become, by the end of this show, a real Marine, not just a kid who was running away from something, but a kid who had transformed because he wanted a different life than the life that he had at home with his mother.
Yeah. And Miles and Liam, your characters are so close to each other. They're very much each other's best friends. And, for Cameron especially, it's kind of his only friend in the world when they start out. And then they're kind of separated by Sullivan and kept apart, and that kind of creates a really different space. And then there's a moment later on where they have a really full-blown argument, and it gets so personal and so emotional. And Cameron even throws a physical punch at his friend in that moment. And how did the two of you set about just finding that entire journey and just those different moments and emotional beats in their friendship?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, at least, like as soon as I met Liam, we instantly had this connection. I've said this a million times, and I'm like, they could not have cast a better person, especially like portraying a gay straight friendship. I think that obviously that's probably very common nowadays, but it does take a specific type of straight person to, especially in 1990, to have that. And we obviously had the example set by Greg, who wrote the book that the show's inspired by, and his best friend Dale, who we spent a ton of time with. But having Liam, who's like, you just fit that so well. Like we genuinely connected so instantly. And I think that really made it quite easy for us.
Yeah.
I mean, this is horrible to say, but the fight scene was like almost funny theoretically, because it's just like so opposes our actual relationship. But there is something fun about that. I think for us, most of our scenes were pretty light, or I don't know. It was fun to have like a completely different scene together all of a sudden, and definitely was like sort of intense on the day. But building up to it, I feel like we were like, "Oh, I'm gonna hit you," and
hit me, you did.
Yes,
yeah, and I deserved it too. So but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But I think that my best friend growing up was gay, and to this day still is, and I think that it's not the most typical friendship that you see on screen, but it exists in real life all the time. And it's not that complicated. And I've said it before, like I think a lot of times in media and film and TV in general, there always needs to be this kind of like coded sense of longing in a gay straight relationship, where one is secretly like longing after the other. And to Andy and Jennifer's credit and the rest of the writers, I think they were interested in something a lot deeper than that, which is like a real and true platonic love between two people, and the complications that come with that. And because it's not as simple as one having a crush on the other. They are two people who are growing up, and the way that they're growing up actually brings them into conflict with each other. They're butting up against each other. They're trying to find space for themselves, and because of that, it's uncomfortable. And, like I think specifically with Ray and his relationship with Cameron, I think what he has to overcome is this, the box that he puts Cameron into unwittingly of being someone to protect and who needs protection. And maybe he did at one point growing up in high school or something, but it's uncomfortable for him to see Cameron not need him as much as he used to. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of people experience when they're transitioning from this period of like an adolescent friendship to an adult friendship. And I just was really grateful that we got to dig into that, and I got to dig into it with someone who is fine. Who I love very much. Yes.
I mean, Max, for you as well with Sullivan, in a lot of the dynamic in scenes and moments that he has with Cameron, at first it kind of looks like he's targeting him and being purposely really hard on him. And then obviously we understand the reason behind, and a lot of the things that he's saying to him about, becoming the best version of yourself and needing to bury your past version. It almost feels like he's talking to himself. And I was interested in how that gave you a lot of the intent during those scenes and conversations.
I genuinely think that was a note. I think that literal line he said in the script originally was to do with teaching him, but then we changed the script a little bit so that it would be Sullivan talking to himself. I think that moment in the dumpster scene is a moment where Sullivan changes from, I'm trying to get him to quit. I don't want him to go through what I'm going through. I need to get him to have such a bad time that he'll leave, to no, I've seen something in him that inspires me, and I need him to understand that he isn't hopeless and weak. He needs to understand that there's something inside of him that can get through this. And he talks about growing up from a boy to a man, like, what kind of man do you want to be? And I think the relationship from that moment on goes into sort of like a real mentor relationship until everything starts to catch up with Sullivan. Everything that he's been running away from starts to catch up with him. He's been investigated. His world is about to crumble. And then this relationship then becomes so tainted that it's almost makes Cameron realize that, maybe Sullivan isn't the perfect idol that I need to look up to. Maybe that's something that I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And that transition from tormentor to mentor is, I think, the thing that we were really excited about seeing what happens when this kid comes into conflict with this Marine at this moment in his life when everything is starting to come apart.
Yeah, I love that phrase, tormentor to mentor.
Yeah, put it in print.
It also feels like so much of Cameron's journey that you've both kind of created and crafted is his purpose when he joins up is, I don't really have any other options, and I'm going to do this thing with my best friend so that we can keep hanging out together, and it's maybe going to be some form of escapism. And by the end, he's the one making the choice and saying, this is what I really, really want. And why was it so important that it becomes something that you actively have him choose within the story?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary journey for Cameron to go on. I think that's one of the many things that makes this a different kind of coming of age story. First of all, the stakes are so much higher with what these guys are doing. And the fact that he is clueless coming in there, you think, oh, that's just Cameron. But as the series progresses, you see that every single person there is running from something, running towards something. It's not just this, here are all the recruits. It was such an interesting way to give everybody character arcs and to really understand how people are making their way through life. And honestly, by the end of the series, when I was aware of it as it was going on, but seeing all the episodes, I came away with this incredible sense of hope that you have this group of characters who some of them should never be getting along. They undergo these incredible obstacles. They argue, they fight, they don't all make it through, and somehow they find a way to get along with each other, to work with each other, and to find a way to have common purpose. And I find that so optimistic and hopeful right now. It really is an extraordinary message to be putting out in the world.
And at the same time, Cameron's journey, I think, also illustrates what all of our recruits are going through as well, which is that even as they're being offered these things by the Marine Corps with discipline, honor, courage, brotherhood, there's also a cost and a trade-off to belonging to that organization. For Cameron in particular, there's going to be this trade-off. And I think by the end of the season, I think we should be left with a question, right, about what is going to become of Cameron. What, now that he's made this choice, how is that going to go for him as he progresses as a Marine?
Liam, I also wanted to ask you about the scene which you filmed during all of the swim test week, where we see the physical manifestation of what you were talking about before, just the level of pressure that he puts on himself and how, he has a real physical experience to things going wrong. And I was interested in how you kind of found the right approach for a moment like that.
Okay, funnily enough,
Not the Puss in Boots.
Yes.
Okay.
The Puss in Boots, The Last Wish. I swear to God, the conversations that Silas and I had, the director of that episode, was we were talking about like portrayals of panic attacks and like a panic disorder on screen, and how a lot of it is like quite dramatic and not actually reflective of like what it's like to go through a panic attack like that. And what we talked about, what we both had seen recently as like, and we thought was like a pretty nuanced and empathetic portrayal of a panic attack, was in Puss in Boots: The Last Witch, which is it's a great movie, by the way. And like, because ultimately it comes down, what centered us was breath. And like what that sequence does really well is it shows how like, you know, the connection to life is your breath, and when that's taken away and what you do to try to get it back, and like the coping mechanisms that someone like Ray has built up over the years to try to, you know, handle this panic disorder that he's not getting professional help from, but has had to learn how to just deal with and move through. And, you know, I think that hopefully what we were going for was not something that was
Feline.
feline. Actually, I wish it was. I was wanting it to be more feline, but something that was like tangible and real and not over dramatized, but something that like, you know, something that is connected to real physical sensations. And that I mean, that's just about like the actual physical filming of it. But, you know, like psychologically, it's just, it's one of those other things that Ray can't quite come to grips with. It's almost something that he can't acknowledge in of himself, that he even has this problem. And so kind of the first step in a lot of Ray's journey over this season is just staring the problem in the face and actually seeing it.
Yeah, you're so right. And Miles, in talking about that journey and that change for Cameron in really choosing being a Marine for himself, and you know what Andy was saying about there is a cost, and he has that literal conversation with himself about, you know, am I going to disappear and not recognize myself if I stay here?
Right.
How did that manifest into the scene that you and Vera Farmiga have together, where he's standing in front of her being like, no, I want you to sign the waiver. I want to choose this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for Cameron, the sort of climax of his journey is that decision at the end. And I think what's really cool is that, or how it sort of manifests, is that he sees Sullivan, and this is someone that he looks up to and he views as sort of the ultimate version of himself, this like fearless, powerful person. And slowly over the season, he starts to realize that obviously he and Sullivan have more in common than he thought, and he starts to see his walls breaking down and him crumbling. And I think that Sullivan suddenly turns into this example of what could happen if he chose to hide that part of himself. And he's actually sort of the bad decision ultimately. And it sort of leads him with this conundrum at the end, where he's on this high from all this growth and learning so much about himself and self-discovery and coming into himself. But the cost of that is hiding this other part of himself. And yeah, I think sort of like Andy said, I think at the end, he makes this decision, but there's still this part of him, I think, in the back of his mind that's not 100% sure that he's making the right decision, or I think maybe he's hopeful that he's going to find a way to balance the two. And of course, then the show ends with this extremely harsh reality of the decision he made of like, whoa, this is not what we thought we signed up for. And I think it's a very, very interesting way to end the show. And I hope that we have the opportunity to sort of explore that more in the future.
Yeah. The finale of this show is something of this season, hopefully not the series, is one that I'm very, very proud of. It's a hard thing to stick the landing of a season, particularly a first season show. You're setting up a lot of different threads, and the performances, the writing, the directing, it's such a satisfying finale that gives you this great kickoff to a season 2. Netflix, I hope you're listening. And you don't get that all the time in a first season show. I mean, it was very thoughtfully and carefully crafted, and then the actors came in and just blew it away and gave their own spin to things. So it's definitely a show worth seeing the second season and the third season.
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
You can tell how thoughtfully it's been culminated and how much detail went into telling the story. You've all done such a fantastic job. So thank you so much for talking about it. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. I know, yeah.